Welcome to Demand Gen Visionaries. I'm Ian Faison, CEO of Caspian Studios, and today I'm joined by special guest, Michelle. How are you?
Very good. Thanks for having me.
Excited to chat today, excited to talk about user testing and all the cool stuff that y'all are doing. And of course, your background. How'd you get into marketing in the first place?
You know, it's funny. It was in the late 90s, and it was right when software was starting. So grown up in Seattle, I think I was going between something coffee related or tech related, and must have flipped a coin and went the tech route, which I think was great, and landed into a role at first was web marketing. And it was at a really small startup that was going through an acquisition and ended up playing a lot of different marketing roles and really grew up over time through the world of product marketing and then eventually product management and then into kind of running the entire marketing organization.
And flash forward to today, tell us what it means to be CMO of user testing.
I love it. So it's interesting. We do boot camp for employees several times a month and for onboarding people. And I usually like to explain a little bit about marketing because I think every time you go to a different company, I always feel like marketing's set up a little different, how they behave is a little bit different. And I think I've always thought of marketing as a function of scale, right? If you think of like really small startups, especially if it's more of an enterprise sales or enterprise-led selling company, there's normally some people selling it, people building the service, and everyone else, right? We're all overhead. I feel like as you start growing, sensing like product market fit, it's scaling, and it's really where you start taking all these functions in marketing. And I see them in a few different areas. One of them is being the voice of the company, right? And being the voice of the CEO. And how do you make sure as you're evangelizing what you're doing and telling the story of user testing, for example, how do we get that brand story out there for trying to bring in new employees, but also out to the market for customers and prospective customers. And then I think the other part is really this arm that's linked arm in arm with the sales team, where it's all about building pipeline. How do we make sure we're building demand, building pipeline, driving revenue? And especially in a SaaS world, it's the bookings and making sure we're continuing to get new logos and growing. And then I think the third area is really, especially in SaaS, is making sure that we're driving customer loyalty and adoption and partnering across the organization to really have that more end-to-end customer experience. And so marketing is really, in my mind, trying to like help scale these functions and organizations, and then partnering with the product and services side of the organization of how do we bring solutions to market? How do we think about our total addressable market? Which ones we want to go after and win? And then how we really bring that to market, enable the rest of the teams, but also really educate the rest of the market as well.
Let's get into our first segment, the trust tree. This is where you go and feel honest and trusted and share those deepest, darkest demand gen and marketing secrets.
Nice.
Tell us a little bit about user testing. What does the company do?
I always say there's 3 aha moments with user testing. And the first one is how often you're trying to really understand what it's like to be a customer. Like you're trying to see if something resonates as a marketer. You're trying to understand what the journey's like. You're all supposed to really do things that resonate and make sense for customers, for prospects. And normally we look at a lot of data. And what user testing really does, it allows you to really understand the perspective from that prospect or customer's perspective. We really provide a whole solution that connects with millions of people. And you can really say, hey, I'm trying to find actually these sets of audiences. And then you can quickly, usually within a few hours, connect with them, allow them to say, what kind of questions do you want? You want to share a certain part of the experience. So I want you to go to the website and see if you can actually find the pricing and packaging. And you literally get to watch while they're going through that experience, thinking their thoughts out loud, telling you what they like, what sucks about it, everything. You can really start seeing the needs and understanding those different customers. And we've tried a lot of different solutions around that. But essentially, the first is most people at that aha moment is you're trying to figure out what is it? And then you start seeing these videos and the highlights reels, and suddenly you're like, oh, like literally they're going through the experience, telling you their thoughts. You can put messaging in front of them and have them see if it resonates. And then usually the second aha is when you realize how fast. It's usually over 80% of everything we do comes back within a few hours. And suddenly you have campaigns you're trying to get out, you're trying to actually run an A/B test. And the fact that you can really, instead of just asking a coworker or asking your spouse, what do you think? You can actually ask a legitimate user, customer, prospect. That really changes it, a lot of things. And really the third is realizing it doesn't just have to be your products or your experiences. You can really understand what it's like for people using a competitor's experience or anything that's out there in the wild, which is pretty phenomenal.
And who are your customers?
So our kind of core audiences at first were user experience designers and researchers. But as we've grown and scaled, people have really realized it doesn't just have to be about prototypes and doesn't just have to be about design. The idea of really talking to customers and getting access can be used across so many other functions. And so it's really people from a lot of product management teams, a lot of marketers, customer experience. We've even seen some on the HR side for employee experience and things like e-commerce. So a variety of different functions out across the company.
And what size company, what industries, all that?
Yeah, so it's fun on the marketing side because we actually scale to the really SMB. So even companies less than 10 are sometimes customers of user testing, all the way up through the large enterprises where we'll have people rolling it out across company multi-million-dollar kind of implementations. It's fun thinking about demand gen across all of those.
Yeah, no kidding. And what do those buying committees look like? As you said, obviously UX is always going to be a key persona, but what else?
So in startup land, oftentimes what we'll see is if you think about that phase, you're trying to find product market fit, but yet you're really small and you don't have access to a lot of people. No one wants to talk to you. You're trying to get people to give you feedback and see if what you're building fits market need. And so sometimes it's the CEO of the small companies. Sometimes it's the heads of product or heads of marketing at those companies, right? And that it could be a decision maker of one. And then as we go up market, we see lots of teams and their dynamics changing where sometimes it's a buying committee. So a lot of the digital teams on the marketing side, something the web teams, how you think of them, or digital marketers, those kind of buying teams happen on that side.
Yeah. So how do you structure your marketing work, especially when you're going after that many different personas and size companies and industry verticals and all that?
We've organized through sales plays, and we rolled out really just a core set of sales plays and personas where what's interesting too is even when I mentioned all those personas, companies are so different too on how they're organized. Usually the role of a CFO is pretty consistent and accounts payable is pretty consistent. And they are
Sure.
right? Consistent across industries, especially in the world of definitely marketing, right? All the titles are very different. Everything in products can be that way, in design and how they're organized. We've really honed in some sense around people who are owning some form of research. And then there's the other teams where it's about conversion rate optimization. And then other teams where it's about if you're really designing or building products or experiences. And so we group the buyers because you might roll up or have different titles that way. So it's more focused around needs versus always titles. And then we share with the field like typical titles that you'll come across. And then we have different plays. So there's specific campaigns that we can run based on those.
Give us a glimpse into your marketing strategy. How do you think about building the strategy?
A lot of the marketing strategy needs to align to our overall business model and corporate strategy. So as a company, we've really aligned around being an enterprise sales-led organization. And so while we do have SMB, as mentioned, even selling to 1 to 10, our style of marketing is not product-led growth. It's much more of this enterprise sales-led motion. And then we have a big part of our strategy, though, is digital. We do tend to get a lot of inbound leads. And so a lot of the strategy for supplying our SMB team tends to be mostly making sure that we have a scaled SMB team, mostly on inbound. And then as we go higher up in the sales segments, then we have different marketing strategies that align to those segments. And so definitely the higher up we go within the market, we have much more high touch events, personalized events, more kind of ABM kind of campaigns. And then we operate globally. So we have different flavors of that when we go into EMEA as well as Asia Pacific. But we're trying to really this year also try to have a consistent campaign that we're rolling out across all those segments around, how user testing can really help organizations mitigate risk and avoid the cost of rework. And so really trying to have that message that can go across a lot of the different audiences.
How does demand fit into that? You touched on it a little bit there, but any specific strategies for demand?
We actually have an SDR and a BDR team. And so the way that we break them down is we have a BDR organization that's specifically doing outbound. And then the SDR organization helps qualify all the inbound. And so when our demand gen programs, it's all about how are we driving traffic to the site, but how do we drive different events and campaigns so that we're continuing to generate leads. And then the SDR team's the one that really partner with to help qualify and turn those into meetings booked. And then we also have a set of programs that are really supporting the BDR organization with ABM to help them think about which accounts we want to prioritize, especially as when we start going up to the really large accounts. Some of our largest accounts have dedicated teams. And so then we do one-to-one programs where we even have sites that are set up specifically just for that organization. We're even having an event here at the end of February that almost like a customer user group conference, webinar, all these types of things, but it's really just for all the users within that company alone. And so there's really specific one-to-one demand gen strategies there.
All right, let's get to our next segment, the playbook. So where we talk about the tactics that help you win.
You play to win the game. Hello? You play to win the game. You don't play to just play it.
What are your 3 channels or tactics that are your uncuttable budget items?
One of them I mentioned, the web, our kind of web channel. Definitely such a huge contributor to pipeline over the years. So all the things that we're doing around optimizing that channel is really important to us. Probably the next one is our paid advertising is a pretty big channel for us. And then third has really been events.
Yeah, zooming into web. Is that anything to do with the website, or how do you look at that differently?
We made some changes to the organization because I really, in the spirit of with the economy and kind of going out in the market, basically the idea was to really see if we can make the most of every dollar that we're investing in our campaigns. And I think when we were growing and scaling really quick, it was really easy to almost have these isolated one-off campaigns instead of really trying to coordinate and have a series of digital touch points, even that might go along with live touch points. So some examples might be, we started to change things so that if you're at a trade show at the booth, we would have an iPad there that allows people to directly book meetings, or directly, we have a digital free test offer that we can kind of sign people up right there. And the website we brought together actually called a Digital First Demand Center, because I wanted to make sure that all of those things were really being brought together. And so it was really bringing our demand gen function along with content, search, and SEO with our digital web experience teams when they're building all those experiences that also have the testing and optimization and targeting within that, and then marketing ops, and then our analytics. And so, because we've been really needing to build out all of our reports and data, it's been a big goal of ours to become much more data driven as well and be able to show the ROI across these different touch points. And so it's really kind of bringing that together, but thinking, how do we make the most of each particular touch point and then capture the data so we can arm our SDR team with more information than just like the lead name.
As part of the web piece, like how much optimizing are you doing on the site? Tons of personalization and things like that?
We basically installed Adobe Test and Target within there. We use a lot of testing tools. We use user testing as a part of it as well. But basically, we're able to now, for example, like the drop-down banner, we're able to kind of customize and personalize that on the different audiences. We've also been on an initiative of aligning our data warehouse. We actually use Segment to really help have a single view, a unified view of a customer profile. And then basically, we've been testing all the CTAs, testing the visualizations, being able to, we've created almost like inspired by B2C, kind of a merchandising area for promos. We're trying to build digital buying journeys. And there's things around not just the industries, but like what segment you're in, different kind of solutions. So you can better understand if they're always browsing certain roles, they have more interest in these types of things. And we've been building mini journeys on the website and optimizing for that. And so we've had some really good wins. One that was really fascinating, it was almost maybe a low-hanging fruit, was optimizing our chat experience. And so There's a lot of work on optimizing when that comes up, testing kind of the scripts, and then getting really aligned with the SDR team that was managing that. And we ended up, it was like 5 times the amount of revenue booked from that channel just through those different modifications. And we just feel like there's still so much more left to really optimize there. And so we also have been applying all these practices to now what we're doing in Marketo with our emails. And so we're doing a lot more testing, just the layouts of the email, the particular subject lines. We also just had an interesting campaign with EMEA. It was great to see all the areas that they tested. We've been working on a lot of messaging and testing them at trade shows and seeing, like, there was one where it was standing room only. People were seated on the floor. So we're like, okay, how do we bring this to our next kind of campaign? And we were testing the format, but also just at the end of the webinar, asking people if they wanted to have a live consultation, personalized consultation, and people were chatting in. So we were able to kind of book meetings just right off the bat of closing out the call. So we've been trying to think about that whole end-to-end sequence of a campaign and optimizing around there.
Seems like you really dig into the details on this stuff. Like, you're not just setting the course and doing one-on-ones.
I feel like maybe it's because it's my tech background. So I started off my career, building websites. The whole product was web content management, and there was portals. Like, I used to have to install app servers and all that type of stuff. And then did marketing automation and Salesforce. And so maybe I'm like wired to learn about those things. But I also just recently had an all hands, and the way I format things is I get other people in the organization to share learnings and share what they're learning. And that one in particular was just shared actually this week by someone on the MIA team. And it was fantastic. I was like, oh, that's amazing. And so they shared the results, and she was kind of walking through. So all those details. If you digged into every part, there's no way I could know all of that. Any
favorite campaigns that you've ran?
I feel like that one really stuck, because that one, it was actually this starting with the mitigating risk. And it's been this journey throughout last year. And so what I loved also about it wasn't just the campaign optimization, but how we worked with the sales organization. So last year, there was a lot of product marketing kind of getting aligned with the field around the messaging. And we're having some early testing with different buyers for on-site meetings. And then we would send out the recordings to people so that people could learn, like, oh, how did people respond to that? And then we were testing things at the different events. But basically, the head of sales, the head of solutions consulting, the head of the BDR and SDR organizations, as well as marketing, were all super aligned on the message and what they wanted the next steps to be. What was great about this one is really just having that alignment all the way through and being able to just make sure everyone's committed to getting everyone trained up. So even while this was going on, the head of sales in EMEA was having all the reps do like practicing their pitches and everything along those lines. So I feel like that's, I think, what I love the most about it. It was, I guess, maybe not just the campaign, but the kind of the whole end-to-end view of it.
We talked your uncuttable budget items. What about your cuttable budget items, or something that maybe you're not going to be investing as much in next year or something like that?
There were definitely events that we were looking at from ROI or certain trade shows that just didn't have a great return. So I think it's hard, always to say a certain channel isn't effective, but definitely there's been programs that we cut back on. I guess in the spirit, we've done some cuts, for example, with content syndication, not because we don't think it's a great channel, but again, to that, the handover, when we were looking at what's actually converting, I think we're trying to change a few things to make sure that there's different ways that we're trying to test to see if we can get those ones to convert, just as well. Otherwise, it just doesn't feel like it's worth spending the dollars.
We hear content syndication pretty often. Again, I'm biased. My company makes video and podcast series, but I think it's just a broader trend of people just build their own now. And like, for example, y'all have a podcast that's been going for 6 seasons that's successful, the Human Insight podcast, if people want to check it out. And so you have your own channels that are doing really well in that way. That effort is sometimes better spent on building your own stuff.
We found other ways where we can leverage it to use it as like a touch point within a broader campaign. But anytime we were just thinking of it as like a standalone and looking at its demand gen and converting, it wasn't working for us. And it's not that I don't think it doesn't work for others, but I think there's a few things within our process we need to improve upon.
That's super fair. We had someone come on that was like, yeah, it's one of their uncuttable budget items was content syndication. And I think that you're exactly right that it just depends on what phase you're in and how you can use things like that. Because much like anything, it's like we don't want to be over reliant on spending money to get in front of other people. And you want to have like, what can we do in-house that can scale and grow? And what can we do that we just pay for? And like pulling those levers at different times is super important, right? Programs versus people and that kind of ebb and flow.
When we look at it across the quarters, cutting back sometimes on that spend to invest in other things or trying to make sure you're hitting that like perfect Goldilocks of spend to get the most bang for the buck in that particular area.
Yeah. The two things that I found really interesting about cutting paid that have come out recently. So you had the Airbnb case study where they were like, yeah, we're going to cut all the CPA type stuff that they were doing and go brand campaigns, which is obviously a totally different type of company than a B2B tech company. And then Rand Fishkin did some studies basically that were just literally paying Google for stuff that would have come to us anyways. And so it's interesting to hear those sort of things that I think we always just said, we're like, well, we have to capture the demand, right? It's like we have to be there. And then you dump a bunch of money into stuff that's like, would those people come to us anyways? I don't know.
Right? I know. And then I feel like it's so interesting in marketing where like the levers all change, right? Because it's like in some sense, you don't always have visibility into certain data sets. And so some of it's all qualitative while you're like, yeah, this feels like a good one. Or you're just seeing things come in top and you're like, I'll never change this. It's amazing. Then you start seeing data and you're like, maybe this isn't actually as rosy as I thought. And you kind of like start tweaking some things, but then simultaneously the market's changing and your solutions are maturing or your buyers, right? Like and things that you thought held true aren't, or it only is like you start getting more data and you realize actually it's true, but just for this segment or this audience and not true for the others. And so I don't know, in some sense, that's why I think marketing's fun because it's always changing, but it can make you want to figure out too.
And that's why they call it a marketing mix, right? It's not like baking a cake, right? You're not like, if you put this much butter in and this much sugar in and this much flour in, like that's not how it is. It's the exact opposite where it's like the amount of butter changes by day, by week, by month. The seasonality of the product when people are buying, all that stuff. It's so fluid.
Oh, totally. So talk to me 6 months later and maybe I'll be like, no, I just totally changed my mind. But it's almost, that's why I even find like benchmarks interesting because we always want to know how other people are structured, how they spend, what their rates are, what their conversion rates and how much pipeline, because those are so interesting to see. But then it's not a recipe book. Like you can't just be like, oh, okay, so if I literally just duplicated that exact same mix, that exact same structure and just put it here, does it all work? Because there's even like maturity level or enablement processes on, I think, the selling side of the world. And then also I feel like sometimes the benchmarks are compared to product-led growth organization. You're like, but that's all different than a different marketing organization.
You have the rise of these like solo creators that are now as powerful, if not more powerful than their like quote unquote industry counterparts of old or like traditional media companies where you have these like macro influencers within a small community that it's like, oh, dang, that person who has 50,000 people who follow them on LinkedIn posted about this thing or put it in their newsletter or like we had Dave Kellogg on this show, like tons of people reference Dave's newsletter, stuff like that. It's a great way to get a little bit more of a trusted feel if they're the type of person who is not just going to let anyone in the door and say, yeah, you can sponsor my newsletter.
Totally. Well, it's so fascinating, right? Because you almost feel like there's this interesting world of like centralization, decentralization, right? Where there used to be, right? Just the ones where they had all the audiences and you were always trying to get in. And then suddenly it was like, no, like I can build my own audience. I can have my own content, my own podcast, my own, right? And then I think ultimately sometimes you're like, oh, shoot, that takes a lot of resources. That takes a lot, right? And then you're thinking, and then you're competing if everyone else has that voice. Then you throw in the mix the whole chat GPT thing. And then you're like, wait, does that change how everyone thinks about that? And you go back to some like centralization again.
where you have, CIO.com, I could pay to reach their audience. And then you're like, but I could just build my own version of CIO.com. And the audience is there anyways. I could just pay to get them in a different way. But I think the thing that is the most interesting thing, and we talk a lot about, is like co-creating with your prospects and customers. And it's the same idea of having them speak at your user conference, where it's like, when you can put like the thing that we're making here together. But I think that sort of approach is really interesting and novel and puts one and one to make three versus like just the more older, like chuck and add dollars at display ad type of a model.
Totally right. Because I feel like once that becomes so saturated, it is the high quality, interesting thought leaders, right? Like it's the different, like it is always the content that makes the difference.
And the nuance.
Totally. Like one of my, again, so I always have my all hands and people presents. One of them was one of the gals in content marketing, and she was writing out a white paper into the spirit of co-creating. And so one of the things we use user testing for is she writes an outline and then actually gets the people she's trying to target to read it. Just the outline, just skim it and say like, what's interesting? What would you scan over? And she's like, it's so fascinating because you hear people literally talking about like, they translate everything into their own words and they talk about, no, like I wouldn't even read a section on like, that's not phrased right. It's really, I feel like makes it so much more powerful when you are co-creating it with a customer and then helping to come up with something other than just like the quick things that you can find on any other site.
That's the future, right? It's like if you can go the extra mile for your customer to figure out what they want, to do all that stuff, you'll win. I'm curious, any cool stuff that marketers are doing with user testing?
In a few different areas, definitely the whole world of A/B testing. I think what I've heard from so many other marketers where we can be really focused on data. And I think a lot of the testing, sometimes you end up finally testing out all the low-hanging fruit and doing all the things that feel obvious. And then you're stuck in this world where A wins over B by like 0.2 or 0.0%. And you're like, and it's almost like you're trying to figure out now the new hypotheses. It's like, how do I come up with something totally different to test? And so a lot of times user testing has been really helpful for kind of sparking new ideas, helping to see something from a different perspective, really bringing in a diverse voice when you're like, I never really thought about doing it that way. So I think it's become, in the more innovative marketing teams, this like triad of a targeting tool, a testing tool, then user testing to help be a hypothesis and testing engine in some sense. Yeah. And then we've also seen on the other side where oftentimes the marketing organization ends up helping to really be a champion of helping the whole organization better understand their customers. And so we've seen ones where they're in weekly meetings, especially right now when everything's changing with the CEO and leadership team, and having them literally watch a few little snippets to help people understand the perspectives of their buyers, the perspectives of their customers, and pulling them through that way. So we've seen it much more as a tool for the users, but also one that's much more strategic and helping align the organization around buyers, especially if they're trying to go outside and find new buyers and new users and use cases.
Let's get to our next segment, the Dust Up. Talk about healthy tension, whether that's with your board, your sales teams, your competitor, or anyone else. Have you had a memorable dust up in your career, Michelle?
How do you define dust up?
It could be a knockdown drag out. You could have gave someone a fish hook and pulled him out of the bar. It could be whatever you want.
It's funny. I've kind of always been a little bit more of disagree and commit type of person.
I was going to say disagree and commit.
I think the more that you can just align on what do you like, what's the strategy and the goal? I feel like sometimes you get into these worlds where you're arguing about all the tactics. Sure. And if you kind of align on that, then you can kind of do a disagree and commit sometimes. Okay, we're going to do this. And then we're going to check back in 3 months and see if it's still working, and if we're going to like change it. Yeah. Tend not to have like huge blows, but I don't know. There's always moments along the way.
Let's get to it. These are quick questions and quick answers, just like how quickly you can talk to someone if you go to qualified.com right now. Qualified helps companies generate pipeline faster. Tap into your greatest asset, your website, to identify your most valuable visitors and instantly start sales conversations. Quick and easy, just like these questions. Go to qualified.com to learn more. Michelle, are you ready?
Maybe. I don't know. Maybe.
Number 1.
Yes.
What is a hidden talent or skill that's not on your resume?
I'm a good networker. I think that's not on my resume.
Oh, that's a good one. We've never heard that one. That's a good one. Do you have a favorite book or podcast or TV show you've been checking out recently?
Actually, my favorite book I'm reading is about, I read a lot of parenting books, but it's about how to drive empathy in children. So I think that one's pretty cool.
I'll need to check it out. I'm not reading enough parenting books because I don't sleep. So what advice would you give to a first-time CMO who's trying to figure out their marketing strategy?
I think what's hard is people kind of come in thinking that if you're the CMO, you're supposed to know everything, right? Like you're supposed to be the one setting everything, setting the vision, and always want to feel like you don't have the answer. And the whole point is you own the decision. Even if that advice, if the idea comes from anywhere, either your colleagues or your team, you ultimately own the decision and the result, but drive the strategy, definitely partner here, especially if you're just first time coming in. I think really getting aligned with your heads of sales, understanding what's working, what's not, build your strategy around that. And then you can keep layering in all the things that you've learned in your past. And then I feel like building out your team, you know what your strengths are and where you come up through from the marketing ranks, and make sure you find some solid people to plug the holes and help you get better on some of the other parts of the marketing function.
Michelle, fantastic. It has been awesome having you on the show. For our listeners, you can go to usertesting.com. They got stuff for marketers, so definitely check that out. We all need more user testing, that's for sure. And we all want to know more about our customers. So go check out usertesting.com. Michelle, any final thoughts? Anything to plug?
I'd say there's an amazing TED Talk that talks about how getting feedback can be a skill. And I was listening to it the other day and I thought about how, obviously, I think that's a user testing thing, right? Suddenly You're hearing people call your baby ugly and you have to be okay with that. But I also feel like it has such great message and a way to think about it from just yourself, being a leader, running teams. If you can really think about feedback as a way to just understand that perspective, maybe there's a way that there's a grain of truth in there somewhere that you can either realize maybe it's a perspective you have to change, or maybe that's actually something that you can change, and try to look at it in a way without getting all emotional. And it was I don't know, I loved it. I feel like if we all can get better at not just giving, but receiving feedback, I think we'd all be better at the end of the day.
I love it. Great final thoughts. We'll link up TED Talk in the show notes here. Michelle, and I'll get some feedback on this episode from you after this.
I'd love feedback from you. It's great.
Likewise. Thanks again. Take care.
All right. Bye.